So hello. Here's the thing. The greatest challenge for the next generation is the struggle for environmental justice, because some communities don't have access to clean water, clean air, safe schools, environmental protection. Some communities don't have the wealth or the complexion for protection. Those communities are called sacrifice zones, areas that are targeted for the disproportionate burden of pollution, for the byproducts of our consumerism, of industrial disregard. Now, sacrifice zones are local and they're global. 10 years ago, I went to South Africa for the World Summit on Sustainable Development. And we met with the South African Environmental Justice Network, and we toured neighborhoods to understand the environmental conditions there. We went to a housing project where we saw children playing just across the street from oil refineries. And it was that shock of recognition that that picture looked just like these children in Harlem playing on Riverside Drive across the street from the North River Sewage Treatment Plant, where they're breathing in toxic emissions that exacerbate asthma and heart disease. Harlem has some of the highest asthma rates in the nation. Harlem is a sacrifice zone despite $2 million brownstones. It is still the dumping ground for elite Manhattan. Now, we called this environmental racism back in 1985 when Chuck Sutton and I were elected Democratic district leaders, and our neighbors told us that we needed to help them mobilize and organize to hold the city accountable for the toxic emissions coming from North River and from hosting 6 of the 7 diesel bus depots in Manhattan. Those are all uptown. And so we had our actionable moment on Martin Luther King Day in 1988, when we accessed the West Side Highway, held up traffic, and were arrested on Martin Luther King Day in 1988. We were called the Sewage Seven, and that included former New York State Governor David Paterson. A few months later, we had a press conference, and we announced that we were filing a lawsuit against the Metropolitan Transit Authority for hosting another depot in Harlem across the street from a school and a large public housing development. We also were announcing the formation of West Harlem Environmental Action, known as We Act. And we wanted to do 2 things: institutionalize an advocacy voice in an underserved community like Harlem, and we also wanted to raise the issue of environmental justice to the agenda of the city and the state. So we mobilized for 8 long years in monthly meetings with hundreds of people coming out along Riverside Drive. We wanted to transform the awareness and build the knowledge of community residents to understand environmental exposures and health outcomes. We used science, technology, and research because we understood that those were important tools for galvanizing strong evidence-based campaigns, empowering residents, and influencing policymakers and the media. We sued the city, and we got a $1.1 million environmental benefits fund as a settlement of that lawsuit. And then the city also committed $55 million to fix that plant. In a first front-page New York Times article, $55 million to fix the North River plant. That was a triumph. And so we also spent the next 18 years contributing to the work that totally transformed the Metropolitan Transit Authority's largest bus fleet in the country to alternative fuels with a diesel retrofit on every single bus in New York City. So We Act has been an important watchdog, but we've been proactive in bringing benefits to the community. 10 years ago, we organized 200 Harlem residents to develop a community-based planning process to transform the Harlem Piers. The West Harlem Piers were a parking lot Garbage was everywhere. The piers had fallen into the water. And we were able to get the city to hold off on building a hotel and to wait for the community plan. And 2 years later, we were able to get our elected officials on board, and we got the city to build that plan. And today, 2 years later, 2 years ago, the West Harlem Piers Park opened, and it is a wonderful resource for families to enjoy the Hudson River, which is a fabulous resource for our community. So nothing builds confidence like an impact on the outcome. And we've got to figure out, how do we scale up impact? How do we create that power shift that uplifts the local voice of affected residents to shape and infuse public policy with their expertise, with their passion, with their sorrow, with their hope? And so we act as working to create that power shift. We're a grassroots organization that works to engage community residents in the environmental decision-making that affects environmental protection and environmental health. We use science and research, innovative methods, and untraditional partnerships to have an impact on local, state, and federal policy that impacts our environmental protection, children's environmental health, and climate change. We work to define a healthy community, and so we look at a number of priorities. Access to good food, especially in schools, where so many of our kids get their meals every day. Reducing waste and garbage, having clean air and healthy indoor environments, open space and parks, toxic-free products, equitable transit, and also making sure that land use and zoning are appropriate for our communities. So I would ask you, how do you define a sustainable community? And how do we develop collective action to really build power and democracy? Because building power and democracy is at the heart of building robust communities that speak for themselves. It is at the heart of our own sustainability. Thank you.